It's time for questions. I promise I'm going to stop calling you the good doctor this episode. That's not.
It's getting a bit weird, actually. Yeah, that was.
Started weird, Ben. It's getting fucking weird.
Maybe I just have a high tolerance for your weirdness. I don't know.
It's been some time after all. What is the first story you wrote which meant something to you?
Um, well, I used to write a lot of short fiction and poetry when I was like a teenager, and it never went anywhere, and it was very anxiety filled and angsty and whatnot. But the first thing that I think actually meant something to me would probably be my first novel that I actually attempted. And this was actually not that long ago, maybe about 7 years ago. And it was called The Irredeemable Soul of Akihiro Bando. So kind of a pretentious name, and it was meant to be as much like an anime that I could make it. And it's kind of a bizarre story, but it was the first time that I thought I had an idea that could actually be fleshed out into a novel length, because I'd written all these short little things, and I just had this moment. It's like, that's not a short story. This is a novel. And so I actually wrote the whole thing, and I edited it, and I sent it to critique partners and polished it, and I ended up even querying it. I took it the whole 9 yards. And I realized actually later that I actually queried my current agent with it like 6 years ago, and he turned me down. He actually turned me down twice with 2 different novels before he finally became my agent. But that's a long story. But so third time's a charm right there. But so I'm sure if I read the book now, it would not be very good. But it was really the first time I was like, oh, I can do this. And it gave me such a boost of confidence that when I came up with another idea, I was like, oh, wait, I have another idea. I think I could do this again. I think I could be a novelist. So it's kind of an epiphany, really.
I think that's a fascinating epiphany to have. What actually? I mean, have you ever examined what it was about that idea and then the next idea that actually it just sort of felt right that it would work for a novel? That there was enough there for it to be a novel.
Yeah. Well, the initial idea for the novel, I had actually thought it was going to be a letter, which sounds weird, but I was working on a project with my 2 sisters. My sister, Jasmine Becca Griffith, is an artist, and we did a collaborative art book with her. Me and my two sisters all together did this art book where my oldest sister Jasmine did the art for it, and then me and my other sister stories and poetry based on her work. And so I had come up with this idea of a painting she could do. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to have a short story that accompanies it that's actually a letter that a guy is writing to his would-be girlfriend right before he goes back in time to try to fix what made her hate him in the first place. And so the whole idea was like, I was just going to have this letter. And then as I started to think about it, I was like, oh my God, but there's so much story there. It's like, well, what if I actually included how he came to be in the situation, and then what happens when he goes back in time, and then how it all builds forward. And so I never actually even wrote the short story. I only wrote the novel. And it was just the scope of it and the sense of, I have to write that. I have to get this out of my brain. And so then when I had the second story idea, it was actually the first time I did a retelling, because I really love writing retellings. And I had read a Irish fairy tale to my daughter that was called The Soul Cages. And it's a very strange, kind of obscure one. It's actually, I found out later, it's a faux fairy tale. Like it was a fake that somebody inserted in a book of fairy tales, but long story short.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and then I had read another story with my other child that was about Japanese pearl divers. And I was thinking, hold on a second, because in the fairy tale, it's about like a merman kind of who has like a special hat and he can dive under the sea and not have to breathe and all this. And I was like, well, what if instead of, a drunken Irishman who puts a hat on and can go under the water, how about it's a Japanese pearl diver who can just hold her breath and under her own strength dive under the water to save the souls that are being captured down there. And so again, it was just these ideas came together, and I was like, this is too big for a short story and I have to tell this. So I think there's this kind of impetus when a story comes up and I realize, okay, this is too big and I'm going to be upset if I don't write this down. That's kind of how it comes down to it.
So do you find it like if you're sitting down to write, you'll think about, oh, I should do a retelling of this thing that I read at X point? or you'll be reading something and you're like, oh, I have a version of this already in my brain that's going to be amazing.
Yeah, it usually is more of a lightning bolt moment where when I'm reading the thing, I at least realize, oh, this has the potential to be something that I want to, spend a year planning and getting into and writing and editing and all that kind of thing. So it usually is more of a light bulb thing, but sometimes I will specifically pursue an idea. Like I have been thinking recently that I want to do a Wizard of Oz retelling or something in that space, just because I live in Kansas and it comes up a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think it would be a good angle to be like, oh, here's this Kansas author who has written, a book about the Oz, mythos and all that. So sometimes it is a bit more purposeful, but other times it's a lightning strike inspiration of, oh, suddenly my brain starts leaping from one idea to the next, to the next, to the next. And I'm like, okay, there's something here. And I start writing something down.
I really enjoyed that insight. It sounds like you're a very instinctual storyteller.
I suppose so. Yeah, at least for the story ideas. I'm a really big outliner.
Right.
And so I really do percolate on an idea for quite a while before I ever try to actually write it. And I usually have a fairly elaborate outline. Whether I actually stick to it or not is another story. But I do plan quite a bit in advance. But the initial inspiration...
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know any other way to do it. That's what works for me. So
we've had all sorts of people that have had great success on the podcast, and they've some of them have said that we had one person say that they put everything into a spreadsheet and they get really really granular with the way that they I was going to go granular actually, but yeah that with the way that they approach storytelling, and other people that are just pure pantsers, and they're surprising themselves with every line that they write. So it's interesting to hear like a mixed. I think that's quite a unique approach that I've got a lot of time for. It's
always fascinating.
Awesome
to me, because we get people who say, I wrote it, I plotted it to be this way, and then I started writing, and the characters wouldn't let that story happen. So I can fully see. It's nice to hear other people affirming that that's okay, because it started happening to me a little bit. I was like, I think this is where this is going, and even in my short fiction now, sometimes I'm like, oh, that isn't where it went, and it didn't take very long because this is a very short piece of fiction. So I'm glad I'm not mad.
Yeah. I mean, I often, even if I've completely outlined the entire story or the entire novel, and then I start writing it, often about halfway through that first draft, I suddenly realize what the book is actually about. And I don't mean, just the plot, but I mean like the theme or like the heart of it, or what the lesson is the character is supposed to learn, or whatever it is. I don't understand that until definitely a good portion through that first draft. So then subsequent drafts are really about, okay, what is not serving that new purpose, and how do I need to, because I'll then continue that first draft to be like, okay, well now I know where it's going. So the second half of the story is shooting in that direction, but then I have to go back and revisit the entire first half to, to edit it to make sense with this new epiphany I've had.
That sounds like it might require quite a lot of patience with the story.
I do a lot of drafts. Yeah.
How do you? What is your editing process in that regard? Like, how do you sort of know that it's going to take you, I don't know, 12 drafts to get to a finished novel, or is it less?
It's really different every single time, which is frustrating. I wish I had this format of first I do this first draft, and then I set it aside, and then I come back to it, and I know that's going to take me 2 months. But every single book I've written has been kind of a different process. But I have a kind of a broad overview. I mean, I go through the first draft, and it is messy as hell. I have brackets all over the place. I have comments where I'm like, insert funny comment here, and just keep going. I don't allow myself to get distracted with a thesaurus or anything like that. I just blast through it. And then I set it aside for however long I can, at least a week or 2 minimum. I come back to it, and then I just read through the whole thing with a notebook where the page that says big edits, medium edits, and then small edits.
Oh, and cool. Okay.
So big edits are anything that's going to affect many scenes in the story. So if I completely remove a character, if I'm going to shift, if I decided, chapter 12 would be a better prologue. So I'm going to pull chapter 12, throw it at the beginning, and then I have to adjust everything and make different introductions of characters and all that. Those would be big edits. And then I make a list of the medium-sized things, which are changes that would affect maybe a couple of scenes. Or something like if I change a character's name, where I'm like, okay, well, I know I'm going to have to Control F, search and find, replace. That would be kind of a medium edit level. And then small edits are things that only occur in basically one spot. I have one scene where the characters are talking about their favorite beer, and I haven't decided what beer it is, and I need to figure out what beer makes sense, and so I can put it in that scene. Yeah. So once I've read through and I have my big, medium, and small, then I immediately go and I tackle all of the bigs first. Or at the very least, I put comments in I actually edit in Word. I draft in Scrivener, but I edit in Word. So I'll do comments, be like, okay, don't forget this character doesn't exist in this scene anymore. Those kind of comments. And then once I've got those cleared up, then I move on to the medium, kind of go through those, add my comments. And I get to the small, I'll add those comments. So then I'm looking at a draft that is really messy and covered with highlights and comments. And then I figure out, what order I have to kind of literally tackle. Because it doesn't make sense to choose to fix the small edits, like what type of beer is mentioned in chapter 7 when chapter 7 ends up getting deleted. So you tackle the biggest things first so that by the time you get down to the little things, that they're still going to be in the draft. And so I don't let people see my work until it's several drafts in, because it would be complete nonsense. It would make no sense.
I've got so much time for that approach. I've never actually heard anyone give that approach before. The big, medium, and small edits approach that you have. That is a bit of a sort of revelation for me. That being a way that you can break down the enormous task of editing a novel, because it is very daunting to edit that amount of words. So just saying I'm editing is actually quite unhelpful, because that could mean you're being, the minutiae of the grammar. It could be the story. It could be the way that the character's backstory works with the story. But being able to identify that it's a big edit, therefore it should go first.
Yeah.
That sounds like it would get around a lot of people's executive dysfunction, I think.
I'm actually doing my local library is having a writers conference in November, and me and my critique partner are actually doing a talk on editing, and that's one thing I'm going to be talking about is the idea of the big, medium, small, and doing in that order. Because if I just started at the beginning of my draft and started going through it, like polishing the language and fixing all my commas, it would be such a waste of time, because that paragraph, that page, that chapter might not exist, by the third draft. So the polishing is probably my favorite stage, when everything's where it needs to be. I know I've got my my plot is where I want it to be, the characters where I want it to be, and I just want to make it sound nice. I love that. That is like why I write, is to do that polishing pass.
So I want you to imagine that you're, for whatever reason, in a field. It's dark. It's very, very late. And then suddenly there's an odd noise, and above you a flying saucer appears. And there's a beam of light, and you're pulled into the air and into this UFO.
All right.
Hello.
Hello.
It is me, an alien. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I care not for your well-being. This was a ruse. Now, see before you a probe. It is either this, or you may share with me one book that will allow me to better understand you. And you specifically, not humans in general. We've been over this.
Well, I consider myself an open-minded person, but I think I'll go with the book to better understand me.
That book does not open minds, let me tell you.
And let's go with the book. Although I'm going to cheat a little bit, because it's actually a book series, and it's the Dragonlance series. At least the first 6 books, the Chronicles trilogy and the Legends trilogy by Margaret Wise and Tracy Hickman. And I picked that not because they're my favorite books, but because they really did shape me the most of any books ever. They were the first fantasy books that I've read. So I was probably about 11, and my older sister got me into the Dragonlance series. And so they were like the first like adult books even that I had read. I've been reading, this was before the days when there was much like YA even. So you kind of jumped from, Wrinkle in Time to suddenly you're reading like hard fantasy. So that was my first, exposure to fantasy, first exposure to adult books and series and things like that. But it also, I was exposed to, there was a particular character who I really liked, who's Kitiara. Have you guys read these books by any chance?
I haven't. No, I have heard of them
No.
before.
Okay. They were like the old TSR type books. Like I think they're written like in the 80s, but they're actually still pretty good, but they haven't aged terribly well. But anyway, so there's a character named Kitiara who is like a swordswoman, and she's just this complete badass who ends up leading armies. And I remember we had all these art books because my older sister is a fantasy artist again. And there were these pictures of Kitiara, and she was so strong. She was muscular and she had armor. And I just remember seeing these pictures of her, and she wasn't drawn like a fantasy elf or anything, who's just skinny and whatever. She was like buff. And it made such an impression on me at age 11 that I started working out because I was like, I want to look like her someday.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I honestly, and to this day, I mean, I still work out a lot. I'm not like a bodybuilder, but I'm pretty darn muscular for a woman. And I have a black belt in karate. I'm doing Japanese kendo. It's like sword fighting now. So I'm very fit and active. And I attribute a lot of that to those books and that character, and realizing that that's an option. I guess that wasn't something that had really come up in my life up to that point. So that was hugely inspirational.
I am going to let you go. Please don't hurt me.
This small grey man is afeared.
Help me.
There's
So-
nothing scarier to an alien than a strong woman.
So in addition to that, then I ended up meeting my husband because of these books. So we met online in 1998, which 1998, if anybody remembers what online in 1998 meant, it meant like dial-up, AOL, old school internet. And this was between our junior and senior years of high school we met. And I had posted on a local Kansas City pen pal page saying that I wanted to have pen pals because I was really into pen pals at the time. I had pen pals all over the world, but I wanted somebody who was kind of local because I was lonely and had no friends. And so I posted and I mentioned like what type of books I like. And so then my, future husband replied and said, hey, I like those books too. We could talk about them if you want to write back. And then I did. And then our first date was at our local Renaissance festival, where we went and looked at swords and we talked about the books. And we actually ended up working at that same Renfest for 8 years as vendors in the future. But anyway, so these books like completely put my life in a very specific direction. And when I started thinking about, what book can you understand me? I was like, oh my God, that has influenced way more of my life than I had ever really given it credit for. I think it's because it came into my life when I was at a very malleable age. But yeah,
I absolutely
so there
love
you
that.
go.
The power of stories in evidence
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah.
Love life, interests, everything. It starts from a seed, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What a positive experience. That's so awesome. Lovely.
I do have to ask when you're going to start a shogunaissance fair, like a Edo period Japanese Renaissance fair, because it sounds like you have the exact qualifications for that. And also
that
send me
would
the
be
date and
so
time,
cool.
'cause I'm going.
Oh, that would be delightful. That'd be fantastic.
My understanding is that you're actually still into Renfest, because I saw from your Twitter that you did one recently.
Well, we go back every year. This time we just went as patrons. Actually, it's funny. We went with my kendo club. So bringing the worlds together. Yeah, our kendo club went to the Kansas City Renaissance Festival. And my husband and I have all the clothes from when we worked there. So we just dress up, and now we take our kids and stuff like that. So yeah, we like going them for fun, but yeah, we don't work them anymore. So.
Do you ever get people going? Have you ever seen anyone that goes to them that's actually like secretly pretending that they're in Star Trek by hiding a comm badge on their Ren clothes?
Oh,
Is that
there
what
is
happens
so
too?
much cosplay of all kinds going on at the Ren Fair. You will have anything you can imagine. People use it as just an excuse to treat it like a con, basically. So yeah, it's
Cool.
not at all unusual to see. I mean, I've seen like Warhammer cosplay of like Space Marines and stuff walking around. I mean, it's anything.
So it's very different in the UK. We don't really
Ah.
have Ren fairs, but we do have like sort of medieval fairs,
Mm-hmm.
which it sounds like they're very similar, but actually in practice I don't think they are, because
Huh.
our medieval fairs are very, they have the vendors and they have some people dress up, but the majority of it is just it's like a normal day out for the
Mm.
local families, and everybody just gets kind of drunk, and there's some entertainment. Whereas I feel I've always felt so envious of American Ren fairs because they look
Me too.
amazing. Like,
It depends. Some are better than others, but it's definitely still a situation where people use it as an excuse to come get drunk. Yeah, there's a lot of drinking. There's a lot of turkey legs.
turkey
Eh,
legs. I've not heard that. Go on.
oh God, yeah, that's like lots of people's excuse for going there. I don't know how many thousands and thousands of turkey legs. It's just giant, like I don't know what they do to them. Roast them, I guess, and they hand them to you like in their foil. I'm a
Oh,
vegetarian, so I've never actually had one, but that's like the thing. And then you walk around, you look like you're a barbarian, and you know ripping off bits of flesh and
Got
all
you.
that.
Sorry, I thought it was like a code word for the way that people get drunk. I was like,
Oh no no no
I didn't get it at
got
all.
them turkey legs.
There's loads of people wandering around with turkey legs.
no! Oh no, yeah, literally people eating turkey legs. Yeah.
Yeah, that's full
No,
sense. Thank you.
As someone who owns his own chainmail, I do feel like I would really enjoy an American Ren fair, but
Oh
the luggage
yeah.
allowance needed to take it to the States would prevent me from doing that.
Yeah.
Also, you've got to
There.
take into account that a lot of these places are a lot hotter than the UK, Nico. And not to out you, but I have seen you almost collapse from heat exhaustion
Oh
wearing
no,
that
I
chainmail.
fully passed out in it. I mean, I'll tell this story on the podcast. We were at a Viking festival, and we'd booked tickets that gave us access to the feast every night, and it was a bit of a logistical nightmare. First year they'd run it, sort of COVID was cooling off, so things weren't running very smoothly, and we'd been drinking all day in direct sunlight, me and Nate, and it's not aluminium chain. This is steel chain down to halfway down my shin. It's heavy,
Mm.
and we've been drinking and sweating, and I thought I'm feeling really unwell, and the food still hasn't come, and it's getting late. I'm gonna go back to the tent and take the chain off, and my fiance found me with the chain up around my head and arms, asleep on the floor outside the tent. So I didn't make it.
And
But it's true.
that is
That
the
is.
perils of need.
But that is a problem. Is that yeah? This Renfest, the Kansas City one, it starts in very early September and runs through mid-October, and it is usually still very hot for those first couple of weekends. You know, it'll be in the 90 degrees, blazing sun, and yeah, that is not medieval Europe. You know,
Yeah.
and I feel so bad for all the like the king and the queen who have all the the authentic all the layers and then the knights who are doing the jousting in their full plate armor, and it's just miserable, so bad. So
I'm gonna put a cut in here for this. Do you know a guy called Gavin Danker?
Tanker, I don't not off the top of my head.
Okay, he's a jousting knight, but he is a family friend, and I just thought you might know him because he's
Ah,
out in the States and he does go to Ren fairs as a tournament
oh,
knight.
well, I don't generally know their real names. I only know their
Ah,
like stage names. So
Do you know his stage name, Nick?
I have no idea. That's a
That
shame.
would be an interesting. Yeah, it'd be interesting if you didn't know my uncle, but you did know this jouster. that would be top notch.
priorities.
Yeah. Let's recut in.
So, other authors, especially sort of your contemporaries, who inspires you?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Haruki Murakami, just because he's definitely the type of author who, when I read his stuff, it's a moment of, God, I wish I'd written that.
Yeah.
And to me, that's often a sign of inspiration. And like I said, mentioning my PhD and the novel that I wrote for that, it was heavily influenced by Murakami and how he handles the other and the concept of doubles and doppelgangers in his fiction. And so I kind of played with those same ideas. And it's set in near future Japan, which most of Murakami's are not. But Hardboiled Wonderland and the End of the World is a slightly near future story of his that I looked at quite a bit for my PhD. So he's definitely a huge inspiration. But I read a lot of other East Asian authors. I really like Banana Yoshimoto. She writes stories that are kind of reminiscent of Murakami. So if anybody's a Murakami fan and they haven't read Yoshimoto's, I recommend. And then just this year, actually, I found a new auto-buy author, and her name is Mona Awad. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she writes kind of absurdist, I would say, like set in contemporary times, but with odd supernatural or magical things happening. She wrote Bunny, and she has a new book that came out recently called Rouge, which is really super bizarre and makes you feel very uncomfortable, but it's just absolutely fascinating, and I couldn't put it down. So she's kind of a new find where I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I were you kind of thing.
It's always cool to find new authors, isn't it?
And
Yes.
do they, in the sense of whether or not they inspire you, do you then try and translate that, making the audience uncomfortable but still engaging them into your own work?
A good question. Not the way that Mona Awad does it, I would say, but it does make me realize that discomfort can be a goal.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of like Nico, your story, how we were talking about how we had this kind of ugh moment of, it's like sometimes that is what you want your reader to feel. You don't have to, the reader doesn't always have to feel, it's like, oh, well, that was inspiring, or this was happy, or even that was sad, or that was scary. Discomfort is a completely reasonable, goal for emotions. So I think it kind of opened my mind to that a little bit more. I haven't played around with it too much because I very recently kind of discovered her and her books, but it's something I'm going to have in the back of my mind, I think, when I'm thinking about stories going forward.
Yeah, I think it's a good lesson that not everything needs to be cozy. It's good to be challenged sometimes.
Yeah.
But also this is a bit of a tangent here, but recently I've been trying to inject more sort of positivity into my stories, and I feel like in some ways, I'm not talking about discomfort, but like negative emotions like pain or loss, things like this, they're almost quite easy to put into a story in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually really difficult to make people feel happy in a story. At least I find. I think happiness is harder to conjure. And I think
Definitely.
if you can press a button like discomfort, maybe you can invert it and get comfort and find a bit of happiness as well. It's that's one to ponder, I think, because I'm always looking for new ways to evoke things. So it's interesting to talk about discomfort in that way for sure.
Send Ben down the comfort path. Off we go.
Get ready to be comfy, bookcase fans.
It was a dark medieval world, but things were fine.
It was raining outside and you're holding a cup of tea. Yeah.
And then the royal guard come in.
For a cuddle.
Oh.
So
sorry.
that got a bit weird.
Really amused by that. Deeply.
Have you ever associated a song or a piece of music with one of your characters, either like when you're writing or whilst you're still in the ideas phase, or even afterwards when the book's done or the story's done and you're reminded of them by a piece of music?
I'm surprised that I do this so rarely, because whenever I do listen to music, it evokes so many emotions and things that and I know a lot of people do like playlists when they're getting ready to write and they want to get in the right, state of mind or something. But I always have to write in complete silence. I never try to, have music be part of the process. But the one time that I really did, though, is associate a song with a character. And I think it was because it was my very first novel, the one I was talking about earlier, where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to try to write a novel. And I had this opening scene, which was like very cinematic. And I think a lot of new writers, they start writing like they're writing a movie, because that's what they're more used to seeing. And so I had this kind of cinematic scene where this character is like kind of skirting around in the dark in like this near future Tokyo setting, and you don't know what's happening. And then you realize that all the drama and stuff is him going to a vending machine to get dinner because he's a hikikomori. So he's like a shut-in who never leaves. And so this is like how he gets his food. And
Wow.
I had this idea, and the entire time while I was like writing the scene, I had a Modest Mouse song. Missed the Boat is the name of it. And for some reason I was like, okay, if this ever gets turned into a movie, this scene is going to be in it, and it's going to have this song, because it was such a lead into the idea that this character, he missed the boat. He had a bad opportunity, or he missed the opportunity to make the love of his life fall in love with him. He screwed it up, and his life just kind of went in free fall afterwards. And so he's at the point of suicide when he gets approached and says, hey, do you want to go back in time and fix it? So it's very thematically appropriate with the entire story and just the tone of it. But yeah, for some reason, that is the only time I have ever done that. Was the very first scene of the very first novel I ever wrote. And after that, it's never come up. So I don't know why that is.
It's fascinating, though. Really enjoyed the premise of that story, by the way. The shut-in doing the cinematic moves to get to the vending machine. That's so cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, someday I may go back and revisit that book, but I'm sure, like I said, it's probably very roughly written, but it's a cool premise. I still like the premise.
An open invite to bring it here when it's done.
Excellent.
To tell people about it, not just for us, but we will read it. So when you're choosing fiction for yourself to read and for yourself to write, are there any themes that really call to you?
I do tend to set things in near future settings a lot, and I think that's partly because I'm afraid of getting setting details wrong. So if I set it in a near future, I can be like, well, that's what it's like in 20 years from now, kind of thing. So it's kind of covering my ass in some ways. But I also am just fascinated by how humanity will change, and I really like the intersection of like artificial intelligence and humanity and where those lines blur. So I'm definitely drawn to any kind of story like that, and I often have hints of that in stories that I write. But I also realized a while back that I enjoy reading about unusual manifestations of grief, which might sound odd, but like there's a book, it might be a novella, it's pretty short, by Max Porter. It's called Grief is the Thing with Feathers. And it's a kind of a literary novel about a family whose the wife/mother has died, and there's this literal crow who comes and like hangs out with the family and like harasses them, and the crow is the grief, and it's very obviously so, but it's like this manifestation of their grief, it's turned into this crow. And in my my debut novel, The Secret Garden of Yanagi Inn, I play with that a lot, because in the original Secret Garden, it's a children's story, and Mary, the character, has been orphaned and been sent across the world to go live with her uncle. And it always bothered me a little bit that she wasn't grieving more than she was. I mean, she was kind of grumpy, but there should have been a lot more grief in that initial story. And so that's something that I really delved into in my novel, because it's intended for an adult audience, and you can really kind of get deeper into more intense emotions. And so, without giving too many spoilers, there is a supernatural element in my version, and there is some manifestations of grief that are literally manifesting. So that's something that I really enjoy playing with, is like this kind of literalization of grief as a physical object of some kind. So and I actually read a book recently which really combined both of those really well. There's a book called Afterward by Nina Schuyler, and it combines this idea of near future AI tech, and there's a woman who had lost her husband, and she basically creates her husband to be an AI entity and to deal with her grief from his loss. And it just was this perfect melding of these two ideas for me. And I was like, yes, this is such a good book. So
what attracts
anything
grief in particular, do you think?
I'm actually sure. I haven't had, it wasn't like any huge moments in my life where I've lost family members, but nothing like hugely traumatic as a child or anything. But I think I deal with grief very poorly. So, like, I'm affected very, very heavily, I think, when somebody I know dies, and I struggle with it quite a bit. So I think in some ways it's a coping mechanism. It's like the more that I investigate it in times when it's not directly impacting me, then the more it helps me move through it. I think when it actually does come up in real life.
Forewarned is forearmed sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, and I don't know if I would go back and like read my debut novel when I was experiencing grief. I don't know if that would be a healing thing or a terrible idea. But because it really is the story. I mean, it's a retelling of The Secret Garden, but it's also a story of a woman who has recently lost her mother and is so overcome with grief that, yeah, she's not coping well, and she's having to learn how to deal with it throughout the course of the book. And it has a very hopeful and really quite a heartwarming end, because she's been able to move through all of that. So I've had people, approach me and be like, "Oh my gosh, you captured the sense of grief so well here." And so they're like, in the end was just like, I was crying because I felt it so much. So I'm not sure why I'm drawn to it, but it is something I think I do. It resonates with me in some way. Yeah.
Just another sort of follow-up question there, I think, but being able to give people that kind of catharsis, does that add meaning to your writing endeavors, do you think? Is that maybe not one of the reasons why you do it in the first place, but after the fact, does that matter a lot to you, that you've been able to help people with your writing?
Yeah, I think so. Well, it's like we were talking about the discomfort earlier, and how if you have somebody go through discomfort, then the comfort afterwards, you feel more strongly. So in my case, I definitely think it was a case of, you have this heavy sense of grief, then you're going to feel the relief from that and the closure so much more strongly at the end, because you've gone through this journey to get to that end. But it is kind of funny, though, that so this book, ends very uplifting, but I can think of a couple of different books that I've written which are very negative arcs, who just end on a very, I mean, not like super depressing, but I mean, they have that sense of inevitability kind of to them, but definitely not happy endings. So I'm not an always writing happy endings kind of person. So, but I think it depends on, what it is I'm trying to evoke. And I think if you're going to throw people in grief, you don't want to end in grief, because then people are just going to put the book down and just be like, well, shit, that was depressing, So you have to balance some things. So.
Enjoyed that. Thank you.
Oh yeah, quite a lot to think about there.
So, what's your next project?
Well, I have another retelling that's out on submission with my agent has it out with editors right now, so I don't really have much to talk about with that one. But I do have, I'm actually converting a novel into a novella right now, which has been a really interesting experience. It's a retelling of a more obscure Edgar Allan Poe story. What is it called? The Man of the Crowd, I think it's called. And it's that blended with, are you familiar with the film Lost in Translation with Bill Murray?
Oh, I love that movie, yes.
Yes, thank you. So think of those vibes,
but
it's an Edgar Allan Poe retelling. And instead of the Bill Murray character, it's a past her prime American actress who's going to Tokyo, and she's actually there to shoot films. But it's framed as like a fake memoir of her experience while she's there, when she goes and basically has a mental breakdown. And so this is one of the examples of this is a negative arc for the character, and it's not going to end well. And you know from the beginning that it's not going to end well. But I wrote it, and it was a relatively short novel. I think it came out to like 55,000 words in the first draft. And I showed the first about 20,000 to my agent, and he was like, I'm not sure if the pacing's quite right here. I'm not sure if this is, all quite working. And I said, you know what? I think I need to just trim this down a lot, make it a novella, and see if it'll work better in that way. So that's been a really interesting project, and it makes me look back on some of the other novels that I've written and think, would this have been better as a novella? And so it may be a thing where I take, if something like died on sub or what have you, and I'm like, well, what if I turn this into a different length of work? Just like how with my initial novel, I thought it was going to be a short story. And then, hey, guess what? That's a novel. Sometimes I think we have to be open to what the story wants to be rather than what we think it should be. And so I think that's an interesting lesson that I've learned this year is sometimes a novel isn't novel for some reason.
Yeah. Do you have an appreciation for Sofia Coppola movies generally, or is it just that one that's really stuck in for you?
Well, that is my favorite, but she also did is it called Marie Antoinette, or I can't remember what it's called.
Oh, yes,
the one
she
that's
did
heavily
indeed.
about Marie Antoinette.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I love that one too. That is just such an opulent movie. So I'm not actually that familiar with her other work, though, to be honest.
There's another one with Kirsten Dunst in it, because she was in the Marie Antoinette movie, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Called the Beguiled with Nicole Kidman and Colin Farrell.
I don't know that one.
That's I would if you sort of dig her method of storytelling and the way that she sort of dives into mental headspaces. That's a really interesting one, and it's very exciting. So
okay, I'm writing that down. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's been absolutely phenomenal getting to hear about your processes and also your outlook on the world. I really enjoyed the way that you met your husband. That's going to stick with me for ages about the Dragonlance books. That's great.
Yeah,
thank you.
The editing, I think we've had quite a journey on this episode. Really enjoyed it.
A scattering of diamonds. It's been great.
Thank you.
Where should people go to make sure that they can keep up to date with you and your publishing news and anything else that you might have coming out?
Okay, great. Yeah. I'm most active, at least currently, we'll see where the world heads, on Twitter. I'm at Amber Ann Logan. The Ann is ANN. But I'm also on Instagram at Amber A Logan. Really, you can just find me on any social media under Amber A or Amber Ann Logan. But I do have a website that's amberalogan.com. And there is an option to sign up for my newsletter there. So that's a good way to kind of keep up on things. Although I only put them out quarterly right now, so not super, up to date on things. But my debut novel, which came out last November, is coming out in paperback this month, October 24th, 2023. So if it's past that date, it should be available. Otherwise, please pre-order. It should be available on Amazon, or you can get it you can order it from basically anywhere that sells books. And there is also a very nice audiobook. The narrator did a fantastic job, really nailed all the emotions in it. So I highly recommend the audiobook as well. And that is
the Secret Garden of Yanagi Inn, for anyone that missed
Correct.
that one.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Any closing questions, Nico?
If you could only wear socks on one of your feet for the rest of your life, which foot would you pick?
Oh, I would just go without socks. I'm the type of person who, as long as I can in the season, will wear sandals. And I kind of hate it when it gets cold enough. I have to put socks on. Like, oh, you only get one foot, but like, screw it, no socks ever. So
I think it's got to be quite deviant to wear one sock all the time, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I'd use it to instill fear in the hearts of my enemies.
Oh, lovely to get to know you. Thank you for your time, for your story, and for your delightful responses to the questions. It's been really illuminating. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been very fun. I appreciate it.
Make sure you come back.
Will do. Yeah, have me back.
All right. Until next time, then. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons.
Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne, and for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?